Hello and welcome to the Gallimaufric Science Podcast, a podcast about science, art, and culture. I'm one of your co-hosts, Raven, and my other co-host here is Scott, my husband.
Hello.
And today we're going to be talking about this amazing book called Mindfields. And this was illustrated by Jacek Yerka and written by Harlan Ellison, published back in 1993. It's a very visceral, kind of sort of impossible realism type of
Surrealism.
thank you. It's a very visceral, kind of impossible, realistic, surrealist book. I guess that would be surrealism in a nutshell. It would be visceral,
Yeah.
impossible realism. But some very prescient things, very prescient stories in this book. It's basically a collection of paintings made by this Polish surrealist artist. And Harlan Ellison decided to put pen to paper and make a series of short stories based off of different paintings. And some of the juxtaposition is rather incredible. And in the background, you hear my elderly cat, Buyo, who is going slowly insane as time goes by, because she's figured out that a Sphero BB-8 fits perfectly into a small paper bag.
Well timed.
Well timed, yes, and she is ripping up paper bags as we speak. So, with that being our background, utterly psychotic cat, let's delve into this book. So, first off,
Right.
my love, Scott, this is a book that you were very interested in, that you have read a few times, you've told me. So,
Yes.
how and when did you first come across this book?
First came across this book, picking up a copy at a half-price bookstore in Tacoma, Washington. And I've always sort of been obsessed with Harlan Ellison as a writer anyway. And the visuals were just striking and stunning to go along with this, with his stories. So there's an image and a story that accompanies it. The combination is quite intense.
Yes, it's a rather thick book for its size. This it's not a very long book, but it's definitely a long read because I would say you have to kind of slow down and savor these stories a bit and
Right.
kind of reread them a little. I know I've had to. So when did you first come across this book? You said where, but not really when.
Oh, mid-90s.
Mid-90s. Okay,
Mid-90s, yeah.
so right about when this book first came out. Very good.
Yeah, right about then.
So this book is full of really great, luscious, I would even say, oil and acrylic paintings, or is it just oil?
I really don't know. That's a good question. But I think acrylic is features heavily in things. I could like to look that up right now, actually, if I can, with the magic of the internet here.
Right. And they don't really have any information about the paintings themselves, just the stories that go with them on the pages here.
Well, it's a little hard to tell from just looking at them, but acrylic work.
Oh, it's all acrylic. Very good. Usually when you have acrylics, things kind of muddy up a bit, but he's done a very good job of making these works pop. The greens are very green, the blues are very blue. But a lot of the stories also have kind of a muted tone as well.
Right.
So
They're very earthy in a lot of ways.
a good example of that would be the first story in the book here is called Creation of Water. And
Yeah.
talks about basically the creation of everything, dreams, memories, and how they met and combined and led to the world we have today, and how night kind of misses memory and dream.
Yeah.
So, but the next story, the second story, is called Twilight in the Cupboard.
Right. This is one of those prescient short stories that accompanies the imagery. And there's an author's note in the back of the book that discusses it at some length.
Right.
The gist of which is basically that Harlan Ellison was looking for something inherently Polish to talk about in his story for this particular painting. And I don't have the book in front of me. Otherwise, I'd be able to pronounce this gentleman's name. But what he came up with was one of the Poles that tried to warn the world about Hitler's campaign of extermination of the Jews in the early 40s. So, and how the world sort of ignored that at the time.
It says here in the beginning of the story about how this individual was actually one of the people defending this town against the Nazi invaders.
Yeah.
And kind of a fallout that happens afterwards, long after the fact. Some scars stay with you for a long time. especially the horrors of war.
So it's the reason the story was written was because Harlan Ellison in the mid 90s saw the rise of Nazism in a variety of different locations and places, far right nationalists, not just in the United States, but all over the world. And now that sort of seems very prescient because in the author's note, he says the Nazis are still with us and never went away, and that we have to be really vigilant about dealing with them.
And a lot of this book has to deal with things that are hidden as well.
Yes. Well, one of the things I think about this particular vein of surrealism that Jacek Yerka indulges in is that there are a lot of hidden things. You have to sort of study the paintings and sort of read them yourself to see what's encapsulated with them.
And then Harlan Ellison kind of adds his own layer and his own
Yeah.
his own thing to the mix. He adds his own veneer and other hidden things in his own words. He is a very good wordsmith. He chooses his words very carefully, just like any other author does with their work. So Harlan Ellison, with his own words, kind of adds his own layer of complexity to the whole thing. And
Right.
Something that I've encountered in this book, just this one, because I think artist Jacek Yerka has another book out, but it's mainly just it doesn't have any of these short stories or explainers. It's just his art.
Right.
But something that I encountered, the combination of the story and the painting itself adds this sort of tension to where
Right.
you feel like, yes, you're immersed in this world, but you're also kind of uncomfortable and not really supposed to be here. There's a sense of like, I'm not supposed to be here. Not really a sense of danger, but like this existential tension of like, I'm a part of this world, but holy cow, is this weird and not someplace I'm comfortable being. You know what I mean?
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
And it kind of invites you really to just kind of sit there and be uncomfortable, experience that uncomfortable feeling, and realize that maybe being uncomfortable is something that you should do every now and again.
Yeah,
If that makes any sense.
It does. I think some of the stories are designed to dislodge the reader and shake the reader up. And we should warn listeners about some of the content and some of the stories may not be appropriate for children.
Right.
Maybe we should talk about Harlan Ellison as an artist and an author as well. He's a very celebrated author and has won 8.5 Hugos, which is an award given out at the World Science Fiction Convention.
Harlan Ellison has had a very storied career. During his life, he wrote a lot of short stories, a lot of books, and he even worked on television shows like J. Michael Straczynski's Babylon 5.
Yeah, and some of the short stories he's worked on are really famous ones, like Repent Harlequin, said the TikTok Man, and The Beast That Shouted Love at the Heart of the World, and I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, being just several examples of some of the stories he's written. But it's an interesting pairing because Harlan Ellison is one of my favorite authors, and Jacek Yerka is now one of my favorite painters. So to see them together in a book like this is, as an introduction to either, would be amazing. But I had already known about Harlan Ellison long before I ever picked up this book. I started reading his short stories when I was 13.
So you would say this was a good introduction to either the artist or the author?
I would say so. There's more to both, really. Like that other volume you mentioned, there's a lot of overlap between it and the other volume that we have for Jacek Yerka's work. But you're right, it does feel like it's missing some verbal component to go along with it. I will still collect the books for sure.
Right. Because, there's something to be said for writing your own story when it comes to surrealism, but there's just something about this that juxtaposes Harlan Ellison's very strong, stark style with Jacek Yerka's. I think they were just kind of made for each other. This book was inevitable with these two.
I think so.
As inevitable as such things can be. It would have been a shame had they not. How about that?
Yeah, I would say so.
One of the stories called Theory of Tension. I'm skipping over a couple of them here. But this one story called Theory of Tension is very intriguing to me from a technical standpoint, mainly as well, because this is a book published in the 90s, and Scott and I are both layout designers, graphic designers, and whatnot. We've dealt with both the pretty pictures end of design and the nuts and bolts layout aspect.
Right.
And the way that this story is laid out is it's this essentially two sides of the same coin, kind of like the picture that it's based on. And you have to turn the book upside down to read the other half. If anybody knows anything about doing layout in the 90s, that was Yeah, that would have been a pain in the butt, getting everything to line up as perfectly as it did here.
It could have been. I think it could have been fairly easy in Quark Express or something like that to do that.
Well, I do see just me, being here. You can't turn yourself off when you're a graphic designer. I do see where
Yeah.
they turned the words upside down and it just slightly does not match up. So it would have been a pain regardless. But basically, the story is about a gentleman at the end of his life. And it's painted in the word picture of a person on the back of a horse with a lance. And the banner on the lance is the banner of their life stretching out. And I thought that was kind of a neat mind picture that Harlan Ellison gave painting. We did kind of already answer this. How does this volume compare to Jacek Yerka's other book? And would you say that you prefer this over the fantastic art of Jacek Yerka because of Ellison's editions here?
I would say so. Yeah. We can talk more about that for sure. But basically, I think the verbal component of Harlan Ellison's short stories really complements the visuals almost perfectly, and in many of the cases. The other thing he says about this book is that the game of it is to make you think as much as you want about these paintings so that you can look at my interpretation or you can come up with your own.
Right. You can either enjoy the story and the painting as one individual organism, or you can enjoy them as separate entities.
And make your own, yeah. Inserting your own interpretation on the visuals.
Right? Or you can even, in your own mind, make your own visual interpretation of the prose, which I kind of like too.
Yeah.
If you had to pick your favorite painting out of this whole book, and I know that's kind of hard, there's 33 paintings in this book total. Which one would you choose and why?
Oh, well, probably because of the short story that accompanies it. But the Cosmic Barnyard is probably one of my favorites.
Why don't you go ahead and tell our readers about the Cosmic Barnyard? Because I read this one too, and I like it a lot.
It's basically a little encapsulated sort of a deal with the devil style story that goes along with this painting of a muscle car with teeth and gums and stuff on the lining the inside of the car itself. Harlan Ellison takes it to some degree somewhat literally and imagines this entire backstory to go along with this particular vehicle, specifying that the radio only plays classical music, and
that was part of the contract.
The part of the contract he signed, yeah.
I'm going to say it. It's basically isekai before isekai, where you wake up and you're in the body of a car.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like isekai from the 90s, written by a Polish artist and a Jewish author. My life reborn as a car, I guess, could be a tagline for it, but that's a little bit hitting it too on the nose. I think I really do like the Cosmic Barnyard as a title. Now, a little thing about this book, Scott was telling me before we started recording, the paintings and the titles came first. So Jacek Yerka would paint the paintings and then give the titles to Harlan Ellison, who would then come up with the stories, correct?
That is correct.
Excellent. So that's your first favorite. Let's look at a couple others that really stick out at you. And why.
Well, yeah, the express delivery, just because of its brevity and because of its amusing nature.
Yes, we need to talk about this one.
Basically, it's a giant barn filled with straw and with wings painted on it. Insect wings.
And there's a cat in the window.
Yeah, of course there is.
There is a cat in the window, and this thing is flying across the countryside. And I really do not want to tip my hand on the text because, dear listener, you really must read this. It is
absolutely
perfect. Even meme-like quality, I would say.
Oh, I would say so. Yeah.
For the early 90s. Back then, we didn't have memes. We had books.
Well, yeah, I mean, the memes were embedded in the books as far as that goes. So, yeah.
Oh, so of course, that one is amazing. The painting is very good. I love how it's got a definite sense of urgency.
Yes.
You can tell that flying barn is going very fast because of the way the hay is trailing behind it. But the cat seems unbothered. Love it.
Yeah. It's like it's just there for the ride.
It's probably one of my favorite combinations in the whole book.
And speaking of details, it was the detail with the cat was not something I had noticed, in spite of having seen the painting numerous times. So I'm glad you picked up on that.
Yeah. There are a lot of things hidden in Jacek Yerka's paintings here. You can get lost in them. Very complex thought out worlds. And again, it kind of adds to that whole thing of, am I supposed to be here when you discover something new? Cosmic Barnyard being one of the last in the book, but not the last, Under the Landscape, which was a very challenging read. This is one of those that has definitely has a content warning on us from us about it because of the very nature of the story.
Yeah, all of these stories should be regarded from an adult's perspective and not something for children by no stretch of the imagination, like we said earlier.
Right, and some inflammatory language for those that may be sensitive to such things. But we can talk about censorship and things like that.
Sure.
That's happening across the country today. And again, that whole thing about being uncomfortable.
And this is one of those stories that definitely shakes the reader out of complacency, not just because of the language.
No, the language is almost, it's meant to shock and provoke and maybe wake you up a bit to the rest of the content.
Right.
Of course, not all the stories are like that. Of course.
No, of course not. Like the Cosmic Barnyard is fairly straightforward.
I want to talk real briefly about one of my favorites, and that is Attack at Dawn.
Of course. Yes, that's the cover.
Attack at Dawn is the cover. So it depicts an old Studebaker-style vehicle with what appears to be its back end slowly evolving into a crocodile, metamorphosizing into a crocodile or a crocodilian-type creature. With bones and bits of detritus of civilization and
mechanical things, yeah.
Cogs and wheels, and natural things kind of littering the landscape in its wake, with living airplanes coming towards it. But of course, my favorite detail of this whole painting has got to be the insane plant life kind of growing around it, because it's not, you look at it at first and it's like, oh yeah, hanging plant tree type things, but then you realize, oh wait, those are horsetails. Am I looking at things upside down? But only when you get into the sky portion. It's a very interesting painting, but the story that accompanies it is about corporate sabotage and having an old man who has done a lot of evil things in his life get his just desserts.
Yeah, it was a good one, that's for sure. Also one of my favorites.
The subject matter is very cool. Kind of a mixture of primeval, almost prehistoric life and modern civilization and the horrors therein. War and all that. So yeah, kind of an interesting tension in both the stories and the paintings.
We should talk about the last painting in the book and how it's got some very sad overtones because the artist started painting it before the death of his son.
Please don't slam the door. In the great tree of life that grows at the outermost edge of forever, a little boy sits in the whispering foliage and string dreams on a silk thread. His house is ready for the hookup. Telegraph poles are all in place, stretching to infinity. All that is needed is a silk thread with its pearls of dreams strung neatly and completely. He is a beautiful child, and his house is warm. His world is filled with light, and his dreams are sweet. Soon he will have his thread fully strung, and he will complete the hookup. And then he will begin to send his dreams back to the places less filled with imagination than here in his lovely treehouse. This is a beautiful child, and his dreams are sweet. His name is Wonder.
Yeah.
It's a very poignant, kind of idyllic, pastoral scene with a definite hollowed out feeling as the house is precariously perched on this very thin sliver of land that is over a chasm, a deep water-filled chasm.
Yeah, and the sense of hollowness that comes with grief.
And if anybody's experienced grief before, they will also notice that there's a fortress-like ridge of landscape that's kind of encompassed this whole scene. Sometimes that's how people react to grief, is they make this wall around them to keep people out, so they don't have to feel that pain again. It's something I know all too well, unfortunately. And I think that's kind of why I connect with this book, is I feel I've felt this kind of displacement before, where I felt out of place in a place I should recognize, or felt kind of, wouldn't say out of touch, but out of step maybe with the rest of what's going on.
Yeah.
When you look at these paintings, you do feel kind of a half step off. But there's a lot to explore in them. And the paintings are kind of beautiful and lush and full of life, even in the ones that deal with death.
Yeah, like there's a lot of snail shell imagery in a lot of them, and a lot of coiling going on, as well as elaborate buildings and structures and
Impossible cities built on volcanoes,
right.
like in the story called Eruption that deals with, well, at first you would think it would deal with Pompeii, but it shows what looks to be an entire city that has either become the volcano or the volcano has become it or will become it soon. But the lights of the city are arranged in such a way that it looks like rivulets of lava spilling out the side of the caldera. I kind of like how that imagery plays out. And then if you look in the very deep background, you can see across the bay a similar one.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a very dark painting, only punctuated by the light of the calderas, if you could even call them that.
Yeah.
Is it a caldera or is it just the city lights? The story itself is, I think, rather interesting. Talks about Sodom, Gomorrah, two cities we've heard of, and then another one that's associated, Yondok Baron. The person that is telling the other individual in the story about this particular city and how it relates to Sodom and Gomorrah is rather telling. Rather telling. I'd like to know more about this old crone that tells the story of Yondok Baron. If you read the book, you'll know.
There's another story with a fantasy bent called Ammonite in the book itself, which is somewhere near the beginning, I think.
Yeah.
And that's another one of my favorites. There's a lot of my favorites in this book, obviously, so picking and choosing just one is very difficult, but I enjoyed the story for what it was and how this race of human beings attempted to hide from the world and then got locked out of their own space because they tried to hide themselves too well.
Hid themselves from themselves.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts on this?
It's a beautiful book. It's an excellent read. I recommend it very strongly, but not everybody's going to have the same reaction to it, obviously, but I still think it's worthwhile. It's available in hardcover and softbound versions. Morpheus Books is the publisher.
See, Harlan Ellison is no longer with us. He passed away when?
2018,
Yeah,
I want to say.
relatively recent.
Yes.
Jacek Yerka is still with us. Okay. Still making art?
Still Making Art has a website and unfortunately has started dabbling in NFTs.
Oh no.
Oh, no,
Oh
indeed.
no. So we got into him before he became uncool. So
I think he just went down the wrong path, and it's going to take some time for that sort of stuff to shake out.
yeah.
But Harlan Ellison passed away in June 28th of 2018.
Very sad day for both of us because we were both big fans of his work. That's it on the book end of things and this book review, if you want to call it that. Now I would like to talk a little bit about us and what we've been up to because it has been a while since our last podcast.
Yes, it has.
So, Scott, you want to go ahead and start in?
Well, we've been working on a mural that Raven has designed for the Alaska State Fair.
Be the third one in a series and the final one as far as we know. I think this is going to be the last one we do this year. So I've called the three murals Valley Views because it goes with the other two that have very well-known views of the Matanuska-Susitna Valley area of Alaska.
And one of the other things we've been working on is I have taken a job in Anchorage, so my availability for doing things like this has been severely constrained, but it's important that I do the day job now. That's another bit of news.
Yay, congrats, Scott, for the new job. So I've also been trying to put together a book of my artwork, mainly focusing on Alaska paleontology, kind of in the style of Dr. David Norman's book, The Illustrated Encyclopedia of Dinosaurs from the 80s, which is a book I grew up with and which turned me into the dinosaur freak I am today. And I know that many people my age were probably turned into dinosaur fans and paleontologists in their own right because of this book too. So I very much like how lushly illustrated it is, and it kind of goes into some technical detail, but not too bad. Something an 8 or 10-year-old could still grasp. So I kind of want it to be something that appeals to all ages and updates people on, the fact that, well, number one, not many people know that we had dinosaurs in Alaska. So that was kind of a surprise for a lot of folk, especially when the Prehistoric Planet show that was just recently released on Apple TV Plus, came out. So at any rate, I'm hoping to put this together, have some illustrations of not only the animals, but also like localities of where they were found. I'm going to be working on maps and stuff too. This is going to be kind of a big project, so it might take me a while. But be sure to check my Twitter feed for more updates on that, as well as my Patreon page. And we'll have links to that in the show notes. So the mural and this book that I'm planning and Scott's new job, we've been kind of busy. So our podcast may be a little shorter and more widely spaced out, but we're going to try to keep up with it. And any closing thoughts, son?
One of the other things I wanted to mention was I'm still working on another painting.
Oh, yes. Tell us about this painting.
Well, this painting is of an obscure Tyrannosaurus Rex, basically Tyrannosaurus Rex.
An obscure dinosaur called Tyrannosaurus Rex. Do tell.
Yes. Basically, I've taken its skeleton, I put Christmas lights on it per the series that I've called the Electro Tiki series.
Right, and this is what, number 7 in the series?
Oh gosh, I don't know. That's a good question. But yeah, I think 7.
Yeah. So number 7 in the series. The first one was Triceratos. So if you look up Scott Elliard Triceratos, you're in for a treat.
I think that's the way that works if you look it up that way. The other way to find out about our stuff is, of course, to visit our website at cgfx.us.
Or cubelight.graphics.
Yep.
And with that, we'll sign off and say good day until the next episode. Thank you very much, and thanks for listening.